It was Valentine's Day, the one day of the year that was meant for love and romance. But for me, it was just another mundane day. I've never been lucky in love, and this year was no different. As I walked down the empty streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loneliness creeping up on me. The only sound I could hear was my own footsteps echoing through the deserted alleyways. I decided to spend the evening at home, wallowing in self-pity and drowning my sorrows in a bottle of wine. But as I reached my front door, I noticed something strange. There was a single rose lying on my doormat, with a card attached to it. Confused, I picked it up and read the card. "Happy Valentine's Day, my love. You will find your perfect match tonight." At first, I brushed it off as a strange prank. But as I entered my house, I had a strange feeling that someone was watching me. I chalked it up to my overreactive imagination and proceeded to pour myself a glass of wine. Just then, I heard a knock on my door. Thinking it was probably a delivery boy, I opened the door without a second thought. To my surprise, there was no one there. I looked around, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw it. A trail of rose petals leading to my living room. My heart was racing as I followed the trail, unsure of what I could find. And there, in the center of my living room, was a beautifully set table, complete with candles, chocolates, and other rose. I stood there, frozen in belief. How did all this appear out of nowhere? Who was behind all this? As if on cue, my phone beeped, indicating a new message. "Let's make this a night to remember," it read. I had never felt so creeped out and exhilarated at the same time. Against my better judgment, I decided to play along with this game. I dressed up and sat at the table, waiting for my mystery suitor to reveal themselves. And soon enough, there was a knock on my door. My heart was pounding against my chest as I made my way to open the door. What I saw left me completely stunned. It was my ex-boyfriend, Jake. We had broken up 6 months ago, and I hadn't seen or heard him since. He had been my first love, but our relationship had ended on a bitter note. "Jake? What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't say a word, but instead handed me a bouquet of red roses, my favorite. Before I could say anything else, he leaned in and kissed me. I was caught so off guard, but soon I found myself kissing him back. All the memories of us together came rushing back, the good times and the bad. But then, suddenly, something changed. I could feel his kiss turning cold and his embrace becoming tighter. I pushed him away, feeling a deep sense of unease. "What's wrong, Jake?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, but instead reached for my hand. I tried to pull it away, but he held it tight, his grips getting stronger by the second. I could feel my fingers turning blue as he started leading me towards the dining table. "Sit," he demanded in a cold, harsh voice. I was too scared to protest, so I sat as he instructed. He sat opposite me, staring at me with an intensity that made me shiver. "You ruined my life, Emma." He finally spoke, his words filled with venom. I don't understand what he meant. Our breakup had been mutual, but it wasn't a big deal. Before I could say anything, he produced a knife from under the table. My eyes widened in fear as he held the sharp blade to my throat, threatening to end my life. "You won't get away with this, Jake," I managed to say, my voice trembling. But he just smiled and said, "I already have. We'll be together forever, Emma." That's when I finally understood. He meant to kill me and spend eternity with me as his prisoner. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth with his hand. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. In a moment of adrenaline, I pushed him away and ran towards the door. But as I reached for the doorknob, a loud bang came from behind me. I turned around, only to see Jake lying on the ground, a gunshot wound to his head. Standing in the doorway was a police officer holding a smoking gun. "It's okay, ma'am. You're safe now," he said, his voice gentle. It turned out that Jake had been stalking me for months, waiting for the perfect moment to kidnap and kill me. And he had chosen Valentine's Day, the day of love, to carry out his twisted plan. I couldn't believe that man I'd loved and trusted could have such dark intentions. As I sat in the police station, giving my statement, I couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just the shock of almost being killed, but also the realization that Valentine's Day would never be the same for me. It was Valentine's Day. There was no love in my heart. I had been single for 2 years, and the holiday only served as a painful reminder of my loneliness. As I walked through the streets of my small town, I saw couples holding hands, exchanging flowers and chocolates, and smiling at each other with adoration. It made me sick. I decided to escape the nauseating sight and went to the local library, hoping to find some distraction in a good book. As I made my way through the aisles, a book caught my eye. The cover was black with a simple red heart in the center. The title proclaimed, "The Dark Side of Valentine's Day." Intrigued, I plucked the book from the shelf and sat down at a nearby table to start reading. The first page was filled with enormous warnings about the dangers of the holiday, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. As I delved deeper into the book, the words seemed to come alive, leaping from the page and into my mind. The pages were filled with tales of love gone wrong, of twisted relationships and bloody sacrifices. I couldn't take my eyes away from the chilling accounts, and before I knew it, the sun had set, and the library was closing. Feeling unsettled, I returned the book and left the library. As I walked home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was following me. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps behind me only seemed to get closer. Finally, I turned around to confront my stalker, but there was no one there. Shaken, I reached my apartment building and hurried inside. But as I entered my apartment, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. On my coffee table lay the same book that had just returned to the library. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Had someone followed me home, or was it just a coincidence? I brushed off the eerie feeling and tried to focus on something else. But as I sat down to watch TV, the power suddenly went out. I heard a loud creaking noise, and before I could react, a figure appeared in front of me. It was a woman with long, dark hair and bloodshot eyes. She was dressed in a tattered red dress, and her hands were covered in blood. My heart thundered in my chest as I realized who it was. It was my ex-girlfriend, who had died 2 years ago. She had always been possessive and controlling, and her death had been a relief for me. But now, she was back, and it seemed like she wasn't ready to let me go. A sharp scream escaped my lips as she lunged at me, her nails digging into my skin. I struggled to break free, but her grip was too strong. In a panic, I grabbed a nearby candle and swung it at her face. She let out a haunting screech and vanished before my eyes. Shaking and covered in scratches, I searched my apartment for any sign of her, but there was nowhere to be found. I knew I needed help, but who would believe me? I was just a lonely person who had just lost their mind on Valentine's Day. As I tried to calm down and process what had just happened, there was a knock on my door. I hesitated reluctantly before opening it. To my relief, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, with a worried expression on her face. "Are you okay, dear? I heard screams coming from your apartment," she asked, concern evident in her voice. I tried to compose myself as I explained what had happened. She listened attentively and then told me a story that turned my blood cold. According to Miss Jerkins, there was a tradition in our town where those who died on Valentine's Day would come back to seek revenge on those who had wronged them in life. I scoffed at the idea, thinking it was just an old wives' tale. But when she mentioned my ex-girlfriend's name and described her disappearance, I knew it was true. Mrs. Jenkins advised me to leave town immediately, but I couldn't bring myself to believe in such superstitions. But as the night went on, strange things continued to happen. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, heard whispering voices in silence, and felt a cold presence watching me. I couldn't deny it any longer. My ex-girlfriend's spirit was haunting me. Determined to put an end to this nightmare, I went back to the library the next day, hoping to find a way to banish her spirit. I searched through every book and finally come across a ritual that could potentially set her spirit free. I followed the instructions carefully and performed the ritual in my apartment that night. As I recited the incarnation, I felt like a sudden gust of wind blow through my room. And then everything went still. The shadows disappeared, the whispers stopped, and the cold presence vanished. I knew that my ex-girlfriend's spirit had been set free. Relieved, I went to bed, hoping to finally get a good night's sleep. But as I drifted off, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "Happy Valentine's Day, I'll be seeing you next year." My eyes snapped open, and I realized that the nightmare was far from over. The curse of the Valentine's Day would continue to haunt me every year until I found true love. But after everything I had been through, I wasn't sure if that was even possible. So, every Valentine's Day, I stay inside, locked away from the outside world. I never know what twisted soul will come back to seek revenge on this cursed holiday. And as I sit alone in my apartment, I can't help but wonder, will I ever find true love? Or will I be forever tormented on Valentine's Day? I never used to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. That was until Valentine's Day 2 years ago when I experienced something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was supposed to be a romantic day with my boyfriend, Ryan. We had been together for 3 years, and this was our first Valentine's Day together. We had planned to go for a romantic dinner at our favorite Italian restaurants, and then spend the evening at a cozy cabin in the woods. As we drove towards the cabin, I couldn't help but feel excited about the surprise Ryan had promised me. He had been acting strange all day, saying that he had something special planned for me. I couldn't wait to see what it was. As we arrived at the cabin, the sun had already set. The cabin was surrounded by tall trees, and the only source of light was the flickering street lamp on the side of the road. Ryan parked the car, and we made our way to the front door of the cabin. As soon as we stepped inside, I noticed something was off. The atmosphere was heavy, and there was a strange smell in the air. I could feel my skin crawling with discomfort. Ignoring my unease, I followed Ryan further into the cabin. He led me to the living room where he had set up a candlelit dinner for us. The dim light from the candles cast eerie shadows on the walls, making me feel even more on edge. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. We sat down to enjoy our dinner, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. Ryan must have noticed my unease as he reached out to hold my hand and assure me that everything was alright. As we finished our dinner, Ryan excused himself to get something from the bedroom. I sat there in the dimly lit room, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I suddenly heard a faint sound coming from upstairs. It was a soft whisper, almost like someone calling my name. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I called out Ryan, thinking it was him trying to play a prank on me. But there was no answer. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming downstairs. I stood up to greet Ryan, but there was no one there. Panic started to set in as I realized I was alone in the cabin. I quickly made my way to the bedroom, hoping to find Ryan there. But as I opened the door, I was greeted by an empty room with the window curtains blowing in the wind. I frantically searched the entire cabin, calling out Ryan's name with no response. My heart was racing, and I could feel a sense of dread wash over me. That's when I heard it again, the faint whisper calling my name. I followed the sound, my feet moving on their own accord towards the back of the cabin. As I reached the back of the door, I noticed that it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped outside, only to be greeted by complete darkness. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stood there in the pitch-black darkness. Suddenly, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was coming from the tree line behind the cabin. Without thinking, I started to walk towards it, my mind filled with fear and confusion. As I got closer, the light grew brighter, and I could see that it was coming from a small clearing in the forest. I paused at the edge of the clearing, my eyes widening in horror at the sight in front of me. In the center of the clearing was a circle of candles, their flames flickering in the cold night air. And in the middle of the circle stood a figure dressed in a long white dress with a veil covering her face. I could feel my muscles freeze in fear as I realized that the whisper I'd been hearing was coming from this figure. With trembling hands, I reached out to push back the veil and reveal the face of the person standing before me. But before I could do so, the figure let out a blood-curdling scream and rushed towards me, her hands outstretched. I ran as fast as I could, my heart racing with fear. I could feel the cold burning in my lungs as I ran towards the cabin. I could hear the sound of the figure's footsteps stepping closer behind me. Just as I reached the cabin, I feel a sharp pain in my ankle as I fell to the ground. I turned around to see the figure standing over me, her face now revealed to be that of a woman in her late 20s, her eyes filled with a sense of rage and sorrow. She grabbed me by the shoulders, her grip tightening as she whispered in a haunting voice. "You shall not come here. This is my domain, and I will never let anyone leave." Panic and terrified, I tried to push her off, but she was too strong. Just then, Ryan appeared out of nowhere, holding a lit candle on his hand. As soon as he reached us, the figure disappeared into the thin air, leaving me shaking and crying on the ground. Ryan helped me to my feet, and we quickly made our way to the cabin. I was still shaking with fear and my ankle throbbed with pain. Ryan explained that he had gone to the bathroom when he came back, and he couldn't find me anywhere in the cabin. He had heard my screams coming from outside and had followed the sound, only to find me being attacked by a woman. We called the police and they searched the surrounding area, but they couldn't find any trace of the mysterious woman. Ryan and I left the cabin that night, our romantic weekend turning into a terrifying nightmare. After that night, I did some research and found out that the cabin we were staying at had a dark history. It was once the home of a young woman who had been jilted by her lover and driven into madness. She had hung herself in the woods, and her spirit was said to haunt the area, seeking revenge on those who dared to come near her former home. So, this Valentine's Day, as I sit at home alone, I couldn't help but think about that fateful night and wonder if the woman's spirit will ever find peace. And I pray that no one else would have to experience the horror I went through, all because of a romantic surprise gone wrong.